In the dust-choked streets of Redemption Springs, 1875, a woman's fingers could coax haunting melodies from ivory keys at sundown and send a man to his grave with a single bullet by daybreak. Rebecca Hawthorne had played piano in saloons across 3 territories since girlhood, but when the notorious Black River Boys decided to teach the piano gal a lesson, they couldn't know they were challenging the woman who'd outdrawn the legendary Gunslinger Silas Caldwell at 20 paces. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The golden light of a setting desert sun filtered through the grimy windows of the Silver Dollar Saloon, casting long shadows across the worn floorboards where Rebecca Hawthorne's slender fingers danced across piano keys. At 32, she possessed a quiet beauty that most men overlooked, focusing instead on the more obvious charms of the saloon girls. Her auburn hair was always neatly pinned beneath a modest hat, her green eyes focused on the sheet music before her, or on some distant memory. Only she could see. 3 months in Redemption Springs, and Rebecca had established herself as nothing more than the piano player, reliable, unremarkable, and practically invisible, despite the melodies that filled the saloon every evening from sundown until the early hours of morning. Her playing was exceptional, though few bothered to notice the subtle complexities she wove into even the most common frontier tunes. To the patrons of the Silver Dollar, she was merely functional furniture, like the bar itself or the spittoons in the corner. Sheriff Daniel Morgan was perhaps the only person in town who looked at Rebecca differently, stopping by most evenings to request a specific tune and leave a generous tip. Not that he harbored romantic intentions. Daniel had been a widower for 12 years and showed no signs of changing that status. Rather, he seemed to recognize something in Rebecca that others missed, a hidden depth behind her composed exterior. "Evening, Miss Hawthorne," he greeted, tipping his hat as he approached the piano during a brief pause between songs. "Mighty fine rendition of Buffalo Gals earlier." Rebecca offered a small smile, her hands resting momentarily on her lap. "Thank you, Sheriff. Any requests tonight?" "Shenandoah, if you know it," he replied, placing a silver dollar on the piano's scarred surface. "Reminds me of Virginia." "I know it well," she nodded, accepting the coin with practiced grace. As she tucked it into the pocket of her modest blue dress, Morgan noticed the calluses on her hands. Unusual calluses that didn't quite match those of a lifetime pianist. What no one in Redemption Springs knew, what Rebecca had spent years ensuring no one knew, was that beneath her modest appearance and quiet demeanor lay a history written in gunsmoke and blood. Those calluses, the sheriff noticed, came not just from piano keys, but from countless hours handling firearms, maintaining them with the same meticulous care she now showed her sheet music. Rebecca Hawthorne had been born Rebecca Sullivan, daughter of James Sullivan, the most respected firearms instructor west of the Mississippi. From the age of 8, she'd learned to handle revolvers, rifles, and shotguns with a natural precision that astonished even her father. By 12, she could outshoot most men in her father's shooting academy in Missouri. By 16, she'd developed a reputation as Sullivan's secret weapon, the unassuming girl who could split playing cards at 20 paces. But that life had ended abruptly when her father crossed paths with Wesley Hammond, a corrupt railroad magnate with powerful connections. Hammond had wanted Sullivan's land for a new railway spur and wouldn't take no for an answer. When threats failed, his men had come in the night. Rebecca, returning from delivering medicine to a neighbor, had watched from the tree line as flames consumed her childhood home with her parents still inside. That night, Rebecca Sullivan had disappeared. In her place emerged a series of identities across the frontier, always a woman with musical talent, always unremarkable, always watching and waiting. She'd spent 3 years tracking down each man responsible for her parents' murder. Some met their ends in what appeared to be fair duels, others in accidents that no one questioned too closely. She'd left Hammond for last, only to discover he'd died of apoplexy before she could reach him, perhaps the cruelest twist of her personal vendetta. With her revenge neither complete nor satisfying, Rebecca had drifted, using her genuine musical talent to secure positions in saloons across the West. Her reputation as a gunslinger faded into whispered legend. Sullivan's daughter became a ghost story told around campfires, her actual appearance and name forgotten as the years passed. Only Sheriff Morgan, who had once been a U.S. Marshal with an unusually good memory for details and descriptions, occasionally looked at her with a hint of recognition that made Rebecca uneasy. But he'd never confronted her, never asked the questions she feared answering. As Rebecca played Shenandoah with a depth of feeling that momentarily hushed the usually rowdy saloon, the bat-wing doors swung open, admitting a group of men whose very presence seemed to darken the room. The Black River Boys, 5 hardened outlaws whose territory had once been limited to the northern counties, but who had recently expanded their operations to include Redemption Springs and the surrounding areas. Led by Ezra Blackriver himself, a man whose handsome features belied his cold brutality, the gang swaggered to the bar, ordering whiskey with the casual arrogance of men who knew their reputation preceded them. Ezra's younger brother Caleb, always looking to prove himself the more dangerous of the two, scanned the room with predatory eyes that lingered too long on Rebecca. "Ain't that a pretty tune?" Caleb called out, his voice cutting through the music. "Almost makes a man forget he's listening to an old maid tinkling on them keys." Rebecca's fingers never faltered, though her eyes briefly flicked toward the interruption before returning to her music. Her apparent disinterest only seemed to irritate Caleb further. "Hey, piano gal, I'm talking to you," he persisted, sauntering toward the piano with whiskey in hand. "Don't you know it's rude to ignore a paying customer?" "You haven't paid for anything yet, Mr. Blackriver," Rebecca responded evenly, continuing to play. "And Mr. Holloway prefers requests to come through." "Him?" She nodded toward the saloon owner, who was watching nervously from behind the bar. Caleb's face darkened as snickers rippled through the room. He wasn't accustomed to being dismissed, especially not by a woman. In one swift motion, he splashed his whiskey across the sheet music in front of Rebecca. "There's my payment," he sneered. "Now play something with more life to it." Rebecca's hands finally stilled as she regarded the ruined music, her expression unreadable. The saloon had gone deathly quiet, every patron aware of the dangerous currents now flowing through the room. "I believe the lady deserves an apology." Sheriff Morgan's voice cut through the silence as he stepped forward from his position near the wall. Ezra Blackriver, recognizing the potential for trouble, intervened smoothly. Now, Sheriff, my brother's just had a bit too much to drink. No harm intended." He turned to Rebecca with an insincere smile. "Miss, we apologize for the disruption. Please continue with whatever you were playing." But Caleb wasn't ready to back down. "I don't apologize to piano players," he spat, "especially not ones who should be grateful for the attention. Look at her, Ezra. Dried-up spinster probably ain't never had a real man notice her before." What happened next occurred so quickly that later witnesses would disagree on the exact sequence of events. Rebecca stood from the piano bench with fluid grace, her right hand moving to brush back a strand of hair that had fallen loose. In that same motion, almost too fast to follow, she drew a derringer that had been concealed in her sleeve. The small pistol was suddenly level with Caleb Blackriver's face, barely 2 feet separating the barrel from his startled eyes. What struck everyone in the room wasn't just the unexpected appearance of the weapon, but the absolute steadiness of Rebecca's hand and the cold, professional assessment in her gaze. "I accept your brother's apology," she said to Caleb, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "This time." For 3 heartbeats, No one moved. Then Ezra placed a restraining hand on his brother's arm, his eyes never leaving the small but deadly firearm pointed at Caleb's face. "My brother misspoke," Ezra said carefully. "We have nothing but respect for musical talent such as yours, Miss Hawthorne," she supplied, the derringer never wavering. Rebecca Hawthorne. Another moment of tense silence passed before Rebecca lowered the weapon with the same swift grace with which she'd produced it, the derringer disappearing back into her sleeve as she resumed her seat at the piano. Without another word, she began, playing a lively rendition of Camptown Races, as if nothing had happened. The spell broken, the Black River boys retreated to a corner table, Ezra practically dragging his humiliated brother along. Conversation gradually resumed throughout the saloon, though many glances were cast toward the piano player, seeing her, truly, for the first time. Sheriff Morgan approached cautiously, keeping his voice low. "That was quite a performance, Miss Hawthorne. Don't believe I've ever seen a draw that's smooth outside of professional gunfighters." Rebecca's fingers continued their dance across the keys as she replied quietly, "My father believed a woman should know how to protect herself, Sheriff." "Your father taught you well," Morgan nodded thoughtfully. "But the Black Rivers aren't men who forget insults easily, especially not public ones." "I'm aware," she answered, her eyes now focused entirely on the music before her. "But some lessons need teaching regardless of the consequences." As Morgan returned to his usual spot by the wall, his gaze drifted to the Black River boys, huddled in intense conversation. Ezra appeared to be counseling patience, while Caleb's face was contorted with barely suppressed rage. The sheriff didn't need to hear their words to understand that Rebecca Hawthorne had just made dangerous enemies. What he couldn't know, what no one in Redemption Springs yet realized, was just how completely the Black Rivers had underestimated the seemingly ordinary piano player. The small demonstration with the derringer had revealed only the tiniest fraction of Rebecca's lethal capabilities. If they chose to pursue this grudge, they would be challenging not just an armed woman, but the daughter of James Sullivan, whose skill with a revolver had become the stuff of frontier legend. As the evening wore on, tensions simmered just below the surface of the saloon's usual activities. Rebecca played with apparent unconcern, though those who watched closely might have noticed how her gaze periodically swept the room, always aware of the Black River boys' position and movements. She was no stranger to waiting. Patience had been her companion through years of methodical revenge and careful anonymity. By midnight, Ezra had finally convinced his brother to leave, though Caleb's parting glare promised that the matter was far from settled. As the batwing doors swung shut behind them, Rebecca allowed herself a small sigh. The confrontation had been inevitable from the moment the Black Rivers entered Redemption Springs. Men like them couldn't abide anyone they couldn't intimidate, especially not a woman who showed no fear. What troubled her wasn't Caleb's wounded pride, but the unwanted attention she'd drawn to herself. For years, she'd cultivated invisibility, becoming the background music to other people's lives. Now, with one impulsive display, she'd risked everything she'd built. Sheriff Morgan's too perceptive gaze told her he was putting pieces together. Pieces she'd carefully kept separated for nearly a decade. As the last patrons staggered out into the night and Mr. Holloway counted the evening's earnings, Rebecca gathered her remaining sheet music and prepared to return to her modest room above the milliner's shop. "I'll walk you home, Miss Hawthorne," Sheriff Morgan offered, appearing beside the piano. After tonight's excitement, it seems prudent. Rebecca knew a polite refusal would only heighten his suspicions. "Thank you, Sheriff. That's very kind." The night air carried a hint of autumn coolness as they walked the short distance to her lodgings, their path illuminated by moonlight and the occasional glow from windows where lamps still burned. Morgan maintained a respectful silence until they reached the milliner's side entrance. "Miss Hawthorne," he said finally, his voice thoughtful, I've been sheriff of Redemption Springs for 6 years now. Before that, I rode with the Marshal's Service for nearly 15. In all that time, I've only seen 3 people handle a firearm with the kind of instinctive skill you displayed tonight. Rebecca met his gaze steadily. Is that so? It is. He nodded. One was a Confederate sharpshooter named Wilkins. Another was a Cheyenne warrior who could put an arrow through a playing card at 30 paces. And the third, he paused, watching her reaction carefully, was a man named James Sullivan. Rebecca's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes confirmed Morgan's suspicion. Interesting coincidence, she replied evenly. Indeed, the sheriff agreed, particularly since Sullivan had a daughter who reportedly shared his gift. He sighed, removing his hat. Miss Hawthorne, or perhaps I should say Miss Sullivan, I don't know what brought you to Redemption Springs, and I don't need to. Your past is your own business, but I feel obliged to warn you. The Black Rivers don't let go of grudges, and they have a particular hatred for anyone who makes them look foolish. Rebecca considered her options before responding. I appreciate the warning, Sheriff, but I've handled difficult men before. I don't doubt it, Morgan replied. Just know that if trouble comes, you don't have to face it alone. Not this time. With that, he replaced his hat, nodded respectfully, and turned to leave. Rebecca watched him go, her mind already calculating what supplies she would need to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. The Black Rivers would come for her. The only questions were when and how many would die before the matter was settled. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dawn broke over Redemption Springs with the reluctance of a heavy drinker facing morning. Rebecca Hawthorne had been awake for hours, seated at her small writing desk beside the window of her rented room. Before her lay a disassembled Remington revolver, each piece meticulously cleaned and oiled, with the precision of someone performing a ritual rather than a chore. The confrontation with Caleb Blackriver had forced her hand. She'd maintained her cover for years by being forgettable. The background melody in saloons across 3 territories. Now she'd drawn attention, and attention meant danger. Not just from the Black Rivers, but from anyone who might connect Rebecca Hawthorne to Sullivan's daughter and the string of dead men she'd left behind. As she reassembled the revolver with practiced efficiency, her mind analyzed her options. Leaving town was the safest choice. She'd done it before, disappearing in the night to emerge elsewhere with a slightly different name and story. But something held her to Redemption Springs, a weariness with running that had been growing over the past year. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Rebecca swiftly concealed the weapon beneath a shawl before opening the door to find Martha Collins, the milliner who owned the building. Good morning, Rebecca, Martha greeted, though her usual cheerfulness seemed strained. I've brought you some breakfast. Thought you might appreciate not having to go downstairs this morning. That's very kind, Martha, Rebecca replied, accepting the tray of biscuits and coffee. Though unnecessary, Martha hesitated, wringing her hands in her apron. Well, after what happened at the saloon last night, word travels fast in Redemption Springs. I imagine it does, Rebecca acknowledged with a small smile. People are saying you pulled a gun on Caleb Blackriver, Martha continued, lowering her voice despite the empty hallway. Is it true? A small derringer, Rebecca confirmed. Nothing dramatic. Martha's eyes widened. Nothing dramatic. Rebecca, those men have killed people for less offense than being embarrassed in public. Her concern was genuine, which touched Rebecca unexpectedly. It had been years since anyone had worried about her welfare. I appreciate your concern, Martha, but I assure you, I can take care of myself. The milliner didn't appear convinced. Sheriff Morgan stopped by earlier, asked me to tell you he'd like to speak with you at your convenience. Rebecca nodded, unsurprised. Thank you. I'll find him later. After Martha departed, Rebecca finished her maintenance of the Remington, then retrieved a wooden case from beneath her bed. The brass key to its lock hung on a chain around her neck, hidden beneath her clothing day and night. Inside lay a custom Colt .45 with pearl grips, her father's final gift to her on her 16th birthday. Beside it rested a leather-bound journal documenting everything she knew about the men who had destroyed her family. Among those pages were notes on Charlotte Black River, Ezra and Caleb's mother, who had once worked as a housekeeper for Wesley Hammond. The connection was tenuous, but enough to make Rebecca wonder if the Black River's appearance in Redemption Springs was truly coincidental. Opening the journal, she added new observations about the brothers, particularly Ezra's calculating control versus Caleb's volatile temper. By mid-morning, Rebecca had changed into a modest green dress and pinned her hair in her usual no-nonsense style before heading to the sheriff's office. The streets of Redemption Springs seemed unusually quiet, though she noted how conversations paused as she passed, resuming in whispers once she was beyond earshot. Rebecca considered her response carefully. "I suppose I'll have to find another way to occupy my evening." As Jenny hurried back to the saloon, Rebecca continued down the street, mentally adjusting her plans. Holloway's dismissal was unsurprising. Few business owners would risk their livelihood to protect a piano player, especially against men like the Black Rivers. What troubled her more was the confirmation that Ezra was taking a personal interest in the situation. If he was publicly meeting with Holloway, it suggested he was establishing his authority rather than operating from the shadows. Rebecca's path took her past the town's small church, where Reverend Thomas Wilson was replacing candles in the window. He nodded politely as she passed, then called out, "Miss Hawthorne, a moment if you please." Rebecca paused, curious. She'd spoken with the Reverend only a handful of times since arriving in Redemption Springs. "I couldn't help overhearing about your situation," he said apologetically. "The church can offer sanctuary if you need it. The offer was unexpected." "That's very kind, Reverend, but unnecessary." "Perhaps," Wilson acknowledged, "but sometimes the mere symbol of sanctuary can make even violent men hesitate. At least consider it, should circumstances worsen." Rebecca thanked him and continued on her way, struck by how quickly the town had divided into those who feared the Black Rivers enough to distance themselves from her, and those willing to offer assistance despite the risk. It was a pattern she'd seen before. Crisis revealed character in ways everyday interactions never could. Returning to her room, Rebecca spent the afternoon making methodical preparations. She cleaned her weapons, counted ammunition, and studied the town layout, identifying potential ambush points and escape routes. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, she changed into a simple, dark blue dress that would allow freedom of movement while concealing the weapons she now carried. The derringer in her sleeve, a knife in her boot, and her father's Colt holstered at the small of her back beneath her shawl. The Black Rivers would come for her tonight. That much was certain. The only question was whether they would attempt subtlety or force. Either way, Rebecca Sullivan would be ready. Years of hunting her parents' killers had taught her that sometimes the best defense was a carefully planned offense. As twilight descended on Redemption Springs, Rebecca sat at her window watching the street below, her father's journal open in her lap to a passage he'd written years earlier. The difference between survival and destruction often lies not in strength or speed, but in understanding your opponent's nature more clearly than they understand their own. Night descended on Redemption Springs, bringing with it an unusual stillness. The Silver Dollar Saloon stood uncharacteristically quiet, without Rebecca's piano playing to fill the air. Patrons spoke in hushed tones, glancing frequently toward the empty piano bench, as if expecting her to materialize. Outside, occasional gusts of wind sent dust devils swirling down the otherwise empty main street. Rebecca slipped through the shadows behind the row of buildings that lined the east side of town. Her steps were silent, purposeful, as she made her way toward a destination few in Redemption Springs knew existed. Behind the abandoned tannery at the edge of town, a small storm cellar door was concealed beneath overgrown weeds and discarded lumber. Sheriff Morgan had mentioned it during one of their conversations weeks ago, a relic from when the tannery's owner had engaged in some discreet whiskey distilling during Prohibition years. Rebecca had filed away the information, as she did all potentially useful details about her surroundings. Now it offered the perfect vantage point for observing the Black River's movements without exposing herself. The cellar was musty but dry, with a narrow window at ground level that provided a clear view of the road leading to the Silver Dollar. Rebecca settled in, her father's Colt ready but not yet drawn. Patience had always been her greatest weapon, a lesson her father had instilled through countless hours of hunting and tracking. The amateur waits until they see their target, he taught her. The professional waits until they understand it. From her hidden position, Rebecca observed 3 of the Black River men positioned strategically around the saloon. One near the hitching post out front, another across the street by the barber shop, and a third watching the back exit. Their attention was focused on the establishment, clearly expecting her to appear for her usual evening performance, despite Holloway's warning. The pattern confirmed what she'd suspected. Ezra Black River was methodical, placing his men to cover all obvious exits from a location where Rebecca no longer was. The absence of both Ezra and Caleb from these positions suggested they were coordinating from somewhere else, likely the abandoned McCarty ranch house where locals had reported seeing the Black Rivers coming and going. For nearly 2 hours, Rebecca remained motionless, observing as the Black River men grew increasingly restless. Occasionally they would exchange hand signals or reposition slightly, but they maintained their vigil with professional discipline. Only when the church bell tolled 10 o'clock did one of them, the youngest, a wiry man with a slouch hat, break position to enter the saloon, presumably to confirm whether Rebecca had somehow slipped past their surveillance. He emerged minutes later, gesturing in frustration to his companions. A brief discussion followed before 2 of them mounted horses, while the third remained at his post. The scenario unfolded exactly as Rebecca had anticipated. They would maintain a minimal presence at the saloon while expanding their search to other possible locations. It was time to move. Rebecca exited the cellar and kept to the shadows as she made her way toward the livery stable. The stableman, old Pete Wilson, had retired hours ago, leaving the building unattended except for the drowsy horses in their stalls. As she'd hoped, her own mare, a dapple grey with exceptional stamina and intelligence, was still saddled from when Pete had exercised her earlier that day. "Hello, Athena," Rebecca whispered, gently stroking the horse's muzzle. "We have work to do tonight." Leading Athena quietly out the back of the stable, Rebecca mounted and set off at a walking pace, avoiding the main roads. Her destination was 5 miles outside of town, the McCarty ranch house that the Black Rivers had claimed as their temporary headquarters. If she was right, Ezra and Caleb would be there, likely with their remaining men, planning their next move against her. The quarter moon provided just enough light to navigate without using the roads, allowing Rebecca to approach the ranch from the most unexpected direction, across the open grassland to the north. Anyone watching for threats would focus on the main road or the tree line to the east, where the terrain provided natural cover. As she drew closer, Rebecca dismounted, securing Athena behind a small rise. The mare was trained to remain in place until called, another skill that had served Rebecca well during her years of hunting. Moving on foot now, she approached the ranch house with the stealth of someone who had spent a lifetime perfecting the art of not being seen. Light spilled from the windows of the dilapidated structure, casting yellow rectangles onto the dusty ground outside. From her position behind a ruined stone wall that had once encircled the property, Rebecca could make out voices inside, one unmistakably Caleb's, raised in argument. "She's made fools of us, Ezra." The whole town's laughing. "Behind our backs, lower your voice," came Ezra's calmer reply. "No one's made fools of us unless we act foolishly, which is precisely what you're suggesting." "What I'm suggesting," Caleb hissed, "is that we stop wasting time with this careful approach. We know where she lives. We go there, finish this, and send a message to anyone else who thinks they can disrespect the Black River name. And then what?" Ezra countered. "We have Crawford ready to sign over control of the watershed, a lucrative, legitimate business arrangement that will make us wealthy beyond anything we could achieve through simple robbery. You want to jeopardize that over your wounded pride?" Rebecca shifted position carefully, moving to a window where she could better observe the interior. Inside, she counted 5 men, Ezra and Caleb, plus 3 others she didn't recognize. Maps and papers were spread across a table in what had once been the ranch's dining room, illuminated by several oil lamps. "Crawford's stalling," one of the unknown men commented. "Sheriff visited him this afternoon, spent over an hour there." Ezra's expression darkened. "Morgan's becoming a problem." "Then let's solve both problems at once," Caleb insisted, pacing like a caged predator. "The piano player and the sheriff. Make it clear what happens to people who interfere with Black River business." Rebecca had heard enough. Ezra was the strategic thinker, but Caleb's violent impulsiveness was clearly gaining traction. They weren't just planning to eliminate her, they intended to kill Morgan as well. The situation had escalated beyond a personal vendetta into something that threatened the entire town. Moving silently back to where Athena waited, Rebecca considered her options. Direct confrontation against 5 armed men would be suicide, even with her skills. She needed to disrupt their plans, create confusion, and divide their forces. As Rebecca rode back toward town, a plan formulated in her mind. The Black River's strength lay in their reputation and Ezra's careful planning. Both could be undermined with the right approach. By the time she reached the outskirts of Redemption Springs, she knew exactly what needed to be done. The town was largely dark now, most respectable citizens having retired for the night. Only the saloon and the hotel showed signs of activity. Rebecca tied Athena behind Martha Collins' shop and made her way to the back entrance, retrieving her key to let herself in. To her surprise, a lamp was burning low in her room. Sheriff Morgan sat beside her small table, his expression grim. "Breaking and entering, Sheriff," Rebecca remarked, closing the door behind her. "Hardly seems official." "Nothing about tonight is official," Morgan replied. "I've been waiting for you." "The Black Rivers are moving against Crawford," Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "That contradicts what I just heard at their ranch. Ezra was discussing Crawford signing over control of the watershed." Morgan shook his head. "Crawford played us both. After I left him this afternoon, he sent a message to the Black Rivers, offering them a percentage of his water rights business. Then he telegraphed the territorial governor claiming outlaws were threatening landowners. The governors dispatched a company of militia. They'll arrive tomorrow." "And the Black Rivers don't know," Rebecca realized, the implications becoming clear. Crawford's setting them up to be captured or killed, eliminating his partners once they've done his dirty work. "Exactly," Morgan confirmed. "But there's more. I found these in Crawford's study while he was occupied with other visitors." He placed several folded papers on the table. "Correspondence with Wesley Hammond dating back 10 years. Rebecca's blood ran cold as she picked up the letters. The handwriting was unmistakable, the same elegant script she'd memorized from the documents she'd recovered after her parents' murder. The content confirmed her worst suspicions. Crawford hadn't just known Hammond. He'd been his business partner in multiple ventures, including the railroad expansion that had led to her parents' deaths. Crawford wasn't just Hammond's associate, Morgan explained, watching her reaction carefully. He was his protégé. When Hammond died, Crawford inherited not just his business methods, but his unfinished projects, including, it seems, clearing certain troublesome landowners from valuable property. Rebecca's mind raced as connections formed. The Black River's mother, she worked for Hammond. That's why they're here. Crawford is using them to continue what Hammond started, probably without them knowing the full history. And now he's preparing to dispose of them just as Hammond disposed of inconvenient partners, Morgan agreed. The question is, what do we do about it? Rebecca studied the papers again, a cold determination settling over her. We ensure justice is served, Sheriff, for everyone involved. The kind dispensed by courts or the kind dispensed by Sullivan's daughter? Morgan asked, his tone making it clear the distinction mattered to him. Rebecca met his gaze directly. The kind that ensures no more families suffer what mine did. She folded the papers and tucked them securely into her dress pocket. Crawford, the Black Rivers. They're all part of the same disease that's infected these territories for too long. Men who believe wealth and violence entitle them to take whatever they want, regardless of who suffers. Morgan sighed, but nodded. His understanding. What's your plan? First, we get Martha Collins out of this building. The Black Rivers won't wait until morning once they realize I've been to their hideout. Rebecca began gathering specific items from around her room. Additional ammunition, a small bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon, and a daguerreotype of a man and woman standing proudly before a modest house. I've already arranged for her to stay at the Wilson farm tonight, Morgan informed her. Told her there might be trouble in town. Rebecca paused, surprised by the sheriff's foresight. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Morgan replied grimly. I've also evacuated the families living closest to the saloon and your boarding house. If there's going to be gunfire tonight, I'd prefer to minimize innocent casualties. The significance of his words wasn't lost on Rebecca. Morgan wasn't just acknowledging that violence was imminent, he was tacitly accepting her involvement in what was to come. The Black Rivers will return to town within the hour, Rebecca stated, checking her. Father's Colt, one final time. Ezra will want to maintain the appearance of legitimate business, while Caleb will be looking for blood. We need to separate them, draw them into a confrontation of our choosing, rather than theirs. Morgan nodded, his expression that of a man who had seen enough conflict to recognize the necessity of what Rebecca proposed. Crawford is the key. If we expose his connection to Hammond and the militia's impending arrival, we can drive a wedge between him and the Black Rivers. Precisely, Rebecca agreed. But first, we need to survive the night. Midnight cast redemption springs in silver shadows as Rebecca positioned herself in the bell tower of the town's small church. The elevated location provided clear sightlines down the main street while offering protection from both detection and gunfire. Sheriff Morgan had taken position in the alley beside the general store, where he could observe the rear approaches to the Silver Dollar Saloon without being immediately visible. Their hastily formed plan was simple but effective. Use the church. Bell as a signal if either spotted the Black Rivers returning, then coordinate to separate the brothers and outmaneuver them. Rebecca had insisted that Morgan focus on protecting any civilians while she dealt with Caleb directly. The sheriff had reluctantly agreed, recognizing that Rebecca's skills might be their best chance of preventing a massacre. Through her father's brass spyglass, Rebecca surveyed the town. The saloon remained open, though with noticeably fewer patrons than usual. Mr. Holloway could be seen nervously polishing glasses behind the bar, periodically glancing toward the doors. Two of the Black River men still maintained their watch positions, one across from the saloon, another near Rebecca's boarding house. The stillness was broken by the distant sound of hoofbeats approaching from the east, the direction of the McCarty ranch. Rebecca tensed, focusing her spyglass on the road leading into town. 4 riders emerged from the darkness, moving at a measured pace. Ezra and Caleb Blackriver rode at the front, followed by their remaining men. Rebecca rang the bell once, the agreed-upon signal, then watched as Morgan acknowledged with a brief flash of his lantern from the alley. Below, the Blackriver lookout straightened to attention at the brothers' approach. The group convened briefly in front of the saloon, engaged in what appeared to be an intense discussion. Through her spyglass, Rebecca could see Caleb gesturing angrily toward her boarding house, while Ezra attempted to calm him. Finally, a decision seemed to be reached. The group split. Ezra and 2 men entered the saloon, while Caleb and the remaining outlaws moved purposefully toward Martha Collins' shop, where Rebecca's room was located. The division was exactly what she had anticipated. Moving silently down the ladder from the bell tower, Rebecca exited through the church's side door. She circled behind the row of buildings, using the shadows to approach her boarding house from the opposite direction of Caleb's group. As she neared, she could hear the crash of furniture being overturned. They had already broken into her room and were searching it with typical outlaw subtlety. "She's not here," came a frustrated shout from inside. "Search the whole building," Caleb's voice commanded. "Check the milliner's quarters too." Rebecca slipped into the back entrance of the shop using her key. Inside, the familiar smell of fabric and Martha's lavender sachets greeted her as she navigated through the darkened store. She positioned herself behind the counter, where she had a clear view of the staircase leading to the residential quarters above. The heavy footsteps of men descending the stairs echoed through the quiet building. Caleb appeared first, his face contorted with frustration, followed by one of his men, the young outlaw with the slouch hat. "Nothing up there," Slouch Hat reported. "Place is empty." "She knows we're coming for her," Caleb growled. "Someone warned her." "Maybe Sheriff Morgan," Slouch Hat suggested. "They seemed friendly." Caleb's expression darkened further. "Then we'll pay the sheriff a visit next. But first, let's leave our piano player a message she won't forget." He pulled a bottle from his coat, a whiskey flask with a rag stuffed in its neck. The implication was clear. They intended to burn the building. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mr. Blackriver." Rebecca's voice cut through the darkness, steady and calm. Both men whirled toward the sound, hands dropping to their holsters. Rebecca had already drawn her father's Colt, the pearl grips gleaming in the faint moonlight filtering through the shop windows. "Miss Hawthorne," Caleb's surprise quickly transformed into a malicious smile. "Or should I say, Miss Sullivan?" "Oh yes, we know exactly who you are now." Rebecca remained perfectly still, her aim unwavering. "Then you should also know what I'm incapable of. Drop your weapons, both of you." Slouch Hat glanced nervously at Caleb, clearly unnerved by Rebecca's composed demeanor. "Maybe we should—" "Shut up," Caleb snapped, his eyes never leaving Rebecca. "You think I'm afraid of you because you can point a gun. Do you know how many people I've killed, woman?" 17, Rebecca replied evenly, "including Thomas Winters in Laramie, the Marshall family in Cheyenne, and 3 bank clerks in North Platte. You're methodical about some things, Mr. Blackriver, but careless about the witnesses you leave behind." Her knowledge of his crimes visibly rattled Caleb, though he maintained his bravado. "Then you know I won't hesitate to add a piano player to that list. The difference," Rebecca explained with unnerving calm, "is that none of those 17 were facing you when you killed them. You prefer unarmed victims, preferably with their backs turned. It's much easier that way, isn't it?" Caleb's face flushed with rage. "You think you know me? You don't know anything." "I know you're not your brother," Rebecca continued, her strategy clear, provoke Caleb while keeping him talking. "Ezra plans, calculates, builds something lasting. You just destroy, leaving him to clean up your messes." How long before he decides you're more liability than asset, Caleb? The taunt struck a nerve. Caleb's hand twitched toward his holster. I wouldn't, Rebecca warned. I can put a bullet through your eye before you clear leather. Your friend here knows it, even if you don't. Indeed, Slouch Hat had broken into a visible sweat, his eyes darting between Rebecca and the exit. What do you want? Caleb demanded, momentarily restraining his impulse to draw. I want you to understand the situation you're in, Rebecca replied. Crawford has betrayed you and your brother. The territorial militia will arrive tomorrow morning to arrest or kill all of you. He's used the Black Rivers, just like he used others before. Confusion flickered across Caleb's face. What are you talking about? Crawford's our partner. Crawford worked with Wesley Hammond, Rebecca explained, watching comprehension slowly dawn in Caleb's eyes. Yes, that Hammond, the one your mother worked for, the one who had my parents killed over a land dispute. Crawford's continuing what Hammond started, and you're his disposable tools. Caleb's expression shifted from confusion to rage as the implications became clear. You're lying, trying to turn us against each other. Am I? Rebecca reached slowly into her pocket with her free hand, withdrawing the letters Morgan had found. These are correspondence between Crawford and Hammond. Your brother might find them educational reading before the militia arrives. For a moment, uncertainty replaced anger in Caleb's eyes. If Rebecca was telling the truth, the Black Rivers had been manipulated into a deadly trap. But pride and rage quickly reasserted themselves. Doesn't matter, he snarled. You'll be dead. Long before any militia arrives, Rebecca recognized the shift in his stance, the slight crouch that preceded a draw. She'd seen it countless times in men who believed speed alone could overcome skill and preparation. Last chance, Mr. Black River, she warned. Walk away. Take your brother and leave Redemption Springs. Caleb's response was a sudden movement, his hand dropping to his holster with practiced speed. But Rebecca had been ready, anticipating the exact moment he would make his move. Her father's Colt roared in the confined space of the shop, the bullet striking Caleb's right shoulder before his gun had fully cleared its holster. He staggered backward with a howl of pain, his unfired weapon clattering to the floor. Slouch Hat froze, his own gun half drawn, as Rebecca smoothly adjusted her aim toward him. Your decision now, she told him calmly. Join him or walk away. The young outlaw carefully raised his hands. I'm walking. This ain't worth dying for. Caleb, clutching his bleeding shoulder, glared at his companion with undisguised contempt. Coward, she's just one woman. One woman who just shot you before you could draw, Slouch Hat pointed out reasonably. I ain't stupid, Caleb. The sound of gunfire had not gone unnoticed. Shouts echoed from the direction of the saloon, followed by more shots. Morgan was presumably engaged with Ezra and his men. The confrontation Rebecca had hoped to delay, now unavoidable. Get out, she ordered Slouch Hat. Take your horse and don't stop riding until you're well clear of this territory. The young outlaw needed no further encouragement, backing toward the door with his hands still raised. What about him? He nodded toward Caleb, who was now leaning against the wall, blood seeping between his fingers where he gripped his wounded shoulder. Mr. Black River and I have unfinished business, Rebecca replied, her tone making it clear the discussion was over. Once Slouch Hat had departed, Rebecca approached Caleb cautiously, keeping her weapon trained on him. The wound isn't fatal, but you'll need a doctor. Caleb laughed bitterly. You're not killing me? The famous Sullivan's daughter showing mercy? Not mercy, Rebecca corrected him. Justice. You'll stand trial for your crimes, all 17 of them. The families of your victims deserve that. Much. Ezra will kill you for this, Caleb threatened, though his voice lacked conviction. You've made a terrible mistake. Rebecca bound his wound with fabric from the shop, then secured his hands with cord from Martha's supplies. Your brother has more immediate concerns. Crawford has betrayed you both. Outside, the gunfire at the saloon had intensified. Rebecca needed to help Morgan, but first she had to secure Caleb. Using additional cord, she bound him to a sturdy support beam. "The militia will arrive by dawn," she told him. "Until then, you have time to consider your choices. Testify against Crawford. Tell the truth about Hammond's operations, and you might avoid the hangman's noose." Caleb spat at her feet. "You think you understand everything, don't you? You have no idea what you're involved in. Crawford has friends in the territorial government, judges in his pocket. You'll never—" "Your mother," Rebecca interrupted. "Elizabeth Black River. She wasn't just Hammond's housekeeper, was she? She knew what happened to my parents." The question caught Caleb off guard. His expression shifted, revealing a vulnerability beneath his rage. "What do you know about my mother?" "I know Hammond used her information to locate my father's property. I know she disappeared shortly after the fire that killed my parents." Rebecca's voice remained steady, though the old pain was evident in her eyes. "What I don't know is whether she was willing participant or another victim." Caleb looked away, his face a complex mixture of emotions. "She never forgave herself," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "Hammond threatened her, threatened us. She didn't know what he planned to do to your family until it was too late." The confession struck Rebecca with unexpected force. For years, she had carried her vengeance like armor, seeing the world divided between victims and perpetrators. The possibility that others had been caught in Hammond's web of manipulation, forced into complicity through their own vulnerabilities, had never factored into her understanding of justice. "Where is she now?" Rebecca asked, her voice softer. "Dead," Caleb replied flatly. "Consumption 2 winters ago. Her last words to Ezra and me were to make something legitimate of ourselves, to escape the life Hammond had pulled her into." His bitter laugh held no humor. "We failed her spectacularly, it seems." A new volley of gunfire from the saloon broke the moment. Rebecca secured Caleb's bonds one final time, then moved toward the door. "If you're telling the truth about your mother, about Hammond threatening her family, then perhaps there's hope for you yet, Mr. Black River," she said. "Choose carefully what you do with whatever chance justice grants you." With that, Rebecca stepped out into the night, leaving Caleb to contemplate the converging paths that had led them both to this moment. Ahead lay the Silver Dollar Saloon, where Ezra Black River and Sheriff Morgan were locked in a battle that would determine the future of Redemption Springs, and whether Rebecca Sullivan would finally find the peace that had eluded her for so long. The Silver Dollar Saloon had transformed from a place of leisure into a battlefield. Tables lay overturned as makeshift barricades, shattered glass glittered across the floor, and gunsmoke hung in the air like morning fog. As Rebecca approached through the back entrance, she could make out Sheriff Morgan crouched behind the bar, exchanging fire with Ezra Black River and his men, who had taken positions near the front windows and staircase. Morgan's situation was precarious. He was pinned down with limited ammunition and no clear path to retreat. Holloway and the few remaining patrons had taken cover in the storage room, leaving the main saloon as a contested no-man's land. Rebecca paused in the shadows of the back hallway, assessing the situation. Ezra displayed none of his brother's impulsiveness, maintaining disciplined fire and methodically working to flank Morgan's position. His 2 companions kept their shots carefully spaced, conserving ammunition while keeping the sheriff firmly pinned behind his diminishing cover. She needed to change the dynamics immediately. Drawing her second pistol, a standard Remington she kept as backup to her father's Colt, Rebecca took careful aim at the large mirror behind the bar. With a single shot, she shattered it, sending fragments cascading across the room. The unexpected sound from a new direction caused Ezra's men to instinctively turn, momentarily diverting their attention from Morgan. The sheriff, veteran of countless gunfights, seized the opportunity. He rose briefly from cover, firing 2 precise shots that dropped one of Ezra's men. Rebecca stepped fully into the room, firing simultaneously at the second outlaw and forcing him to dive behind an overturned table. "Sullivan's daughter," Ezra called out, recognizing Rebecca despite the poor lighting. Unlike his men, he hadn't been rattled by the new threat, maintaining his position with calculated composure. "I was wondering when you'd join us." "Your brother. He sends his regrets, Mr. Black River," Rebecca replied, moving laterally to a better position while keeping her weapons trained toward Ezra's voice. "He's indisposed at the moment." A brief silence followed as Ezra processed this information. "Caleb always did lack patience," he finally responded, his tone revealing nothing of his feelings about his brother's presumed capture or death. "A family failing my mother often lamented." Morgan used the exchange to reload, catching Rebecca's iron signaling toward the staircase, where Ezra's remaining man was attempting to establish a better shooting position. With a subtle nod, Rebecca acknowledged, then deliberately raised her voice. "Speaking of family, Mr. Black River, I believe you should know that Benjamin Crawford was Wesley Hammond's business partner. The same Hammond who employed your mother." The calculated revelation had its intended effect. Ezra's composure faltered, evident in his momentary silence. "You're attempting to manipulate me, Miss Sullivan." A predictable tactic. The territorial militia arrives tomorrow morning, Rebecca continued, signaling to Morgan to prepare to move. "Crawford has informed the governor that outlaws are threatening local landowners. He's eliminating you and your men to cover his connection to Hammond's operations. Operations that included the murder of my parents." Ezra's remaining man glanced uncertainly toward his boss, clearly unsettled by Rebecca's words. The momentary distraction was all Morgan needed. He fired twice, striking the outlaw in the arm and sending him scrambling back down the staircase with a pained shout. "Proof lies in Crawford's safe." Rebecca pressed her advantage. "Correspondence between Hammond and Crawford dating back a decade. Your brother confirmed your mother was coerced by Hammond, threatened into providing information that led to my parents' deaths." "Caleb told you that?" For the first time, genuine emotion entered Ezra's voice, surprise mixed with something like vulnerability. "He did," Rebecca confirmed. "I believe him. Your mother was another of Hammond's victims, Mr. Black River, and Crawford is using you just as Hammond used her." A tense silence settled over the saloon, broken only by the groans of the wounded outlaw. Morgan remained in position, his gun trained steadily toward Ezra's location, but he made no move to fire. This was Rebecca's play, and he understood its importance. "What's your proposal, Miss Sullivan?" Ezra finally asked, his voice controlled once more. "I assume you have one, or we'd still be exchanging bullets rather than words." Rebecca moved, carefully to where she could see Ezra in profile, still behind cover, but now visible enough to establish the personal connection necessary for negotiation. "Crawford arrives at dawn to witness your arrest or burial. Begone before then. Take your brother and your wounded and leave Redemption Springs, leaving you and the sheriff to deal with Crawford," Ezra concluded with grudging admiration. "Clever. But you're forgetting something crucial. Crawford still holds our payment. $20,000 for the work we've done clearing smaller ranches from the watershed. Money taken through intimidation and violence," Morgan interjected. "Business," Ezra corrected. "Unpleasant, perhaps, but merely the frontier version of tactics your eastern banks and railroads employ daily." Rebecca recognized the impasse. Ezra wouldn't leave without his payment, and they couldn't allow the Black Rivers to continue their criminal activities. Yet something in his defense of his actions, comparing them to the legitimate operations of powerful Eastern interests, struck a chord with her. There was truth in his assessment, however self-serving. What if there were another option, she suggested? one that provides justice for past wrongs while offering a possibility of redemption. Ezra's laugh held no humor. Redemption isn't generally available to men like me, Miss Sullivan. Perhaps not, Rebecca acknowledged, but justice might be possible for your mother and for mine. Crawford manipulated your family just as Hammond did. Help us expose him, and I'll testify that you cooperated with the law. Morgan shot her a warning glance, clearly uncomfortable with this unauthorized offer, but Rebecca pressed on. You're right about one thing, Mr. Black River. Powerful men have always used others to do their dirty work, then discarded them when convenient. Hammond did it to your mother. Crawford is doing it to you. The cycle continues because those with wealth and influence are never held accountable. She could see her words finding purchase in Ezra's calculating mind. He was above all a pragmatist. If the militia truly was arriving at dawn, his options were limited: flee without payment, die fighting, or consider Rebecca's unexpected proposal. What exactly would this cooperation entail? He asked cautiously. You help us secure evidence from Crawford's safe tonight, Rebecca explained. The correspondence proving his connection to Hammond and the plot against my family. Then you provide sworn testimony about Crawford's methods, the ranchers he targeted, and how he employed the Black River gang. And in exchange, Sheriff Morgan recommends leniency to the territorial judge. Your previous crimes don't disappear, but you gain the possibility of a future beyond a hangman's noose. Morgan finally spoke, his tone measured. I can support those terms, Black River, but they're contingent on complete cooperation, beginning now. Your weapons on the floor, hands where I can see them. A moment of tension followed as Ezra weighed his limited options. Finally, his twin revolvers slid across the floor, followed by Ezra himself emerging with raised hands. I accept your terms, he stated formally, but I want assurances regarding Caleb as well. My brother is impulsive and often cruel, but he follows where I lead. His crimes are ultimately my responsibility. Rebecca studied Ezra's face, searching for deception and finding instead a complex mixture of calculation and genuine concern. The bond between the brothers was real, despite their differences, perhaps the only thing in Ezra's life that transcended his pragmatic self-interest. Same terms apply to him, she agreed, provided he cooperates fully. With the immediate threat neutralized, they attended to the wounded. Ezra's man with a bullet in his arm, and the other who still breathed, despite Morgan's well-placed shots. Holloway and the remaining patrons emerged cautiously from the storage, a room wide-eyed at the unexpected alliance forming before them. Mr. Holloway, Morgan addressed the saloon owner. I need you to fetch Doc Simmons for these men, then spread the word that the situation is under control. No need for anyone else to get involved tonight. As Holloway hurried to comply, Rebecca retrieved Caleb from the milliner's shop. The younger Black River had lost blood, but remained defiant, glaring at his brother upon seeing him cooperating with Morgan and Rebecca. You're making a deal with them? Caleb spat. After everything? Be quiet and listen for once, Ezra replied sharply. Crawford betrayed us, used us just like Hammond used Mother. Miss Sullivan is offering us a chance to avoid the noose while settling that account. Mention of their mother tempered Caleb's anger somewhat. He glanced at Rebecca with new understanding, recognizing that their shared connection to Hammond's machinations had created an unexpected alignment of interests. Crawford needs to pay, he admitted grudgingly. But how do we get to his safe? The man's estate is better guarded than most banks. Morgan spread a rough map of Redemption Springs on the bar, including the outlying properties. Crawford's ranch is here, 2 miles north of town. Main house has 4 permanent guards, plus whatever additional security he's added given the situation. 6 men total, Ezra corrected, studying the map. 2 patrol the grounds at night, rotating hourly. The safe is in Crawford's study, combination known only to him. You've already scouted it, Rebecca observed. Ezra shrugged. I make contingency plans. Trust is a luxury in our profession. How do we get Crawford to open it? Morgan asked, directing the question to both Black Rivers. We don't, Rebecca interjected, a plan already forming. We bring Crawford to us, force his hand here in town, where he can't rely on his security. And how exactly do we manage that? Caleb challenged, skepticism evident in his voice. Rebecca's smile held no warmth. By giving Benjamin Crawford exactly what he wants, the captured Black River gang and the woman who helped bring them down. A triumphant return to town before the militia arrives would cement his story as the heroic citizen who helped eliminate a dangerous threat. Understanding dawned on Morgan's face. We bait the trap with ourselves. Precisely, Rebecca confirmed. Crawford won't be able to resist taking personal credit for our capture. Once he's here, away from his guards and security, we can leverage the situation to access the contents of his safe. Ezra nodded approval, professional admiration evident in his expression. Simple, elegant, and exploits Crawford's vanity. I would have suggested something similar. Doc Simmons arrived, clucking disapprovingly at the wounds, but setting to work with professional detachment. As he tended to Caleb's shoulder and the injuries of Ezra's men, the unlikely allies refined their plan. By the time the doctor had finished his ministrations, they had established the details of their trap. Dawn was still hours away, but the wheels were already in motion for a confrontation that would determine the future of not just Rebecca Sullivan, but of Redemption Springs itself. As Rebecca stepped outside to clear her head, the night air cool against her face, she realized that for the first time in years, her path forward involved something beyond vengeance. Justice for her parents remained her primary motivation, but now it was entangled with a more complex understanding of victims and perpetrators, of systems that corrupted, and the possibility, however remote, of redemption even for those who had committed terrible acts. Sheriff Morgan joined her on the boardwalk, his weathered face reflecting similar contemplation. You know this plan has 1,000 ways to go wrong, he commented, not unkindly. Most worthwhile endeavors do, Rebecca replied. But sometimes justice requires risk. The sheriff nodded, gazing toward the eastern horizon where the first hints of gray would eventually herald a new day. Your father would be proud, you know, not just of your skill with a weapon, but of your understanding of true justice. The unexpected words touched Rebecca deeply. I hope so, Sheriff. I've spent so many years focused on what he taught me about shooting that I sometimes forget the more important lessons. About seeing people as they truly are. About understanding that the world isn't simply divided between good people and bad. Yes, Rebecca agreed softly, though I'm still learning that particular lesson. Together, they stood in companionable silence, watching as Redemption Springs slept on, unaware of the reckoning that awaited with the morning light. The pre-dawn hours passed in tense preparation. The Silver Dollar Saloon, still bearing the scars of the earlier gunfight, had been transformed into the stage for their dangerous performance. Ezra, Caleb, and their surviving man were positioned as captives, bound to chairs, but with hidden knives accessible should the need arise. Morgan had placed trusted deputies at strategic locations throughout town, ready to move when signaled. Rebecca sat at the piano, her fingers absently tracing melodies as she reviewed each aspect of their plan. The familiar instrument offered strange comfort amid the tension, a reminder of the quiet life she had constructed for herself between moments of violence. You play beautifully, Ezra observed from his staged captivity. It's not an act, is it? The piano playing, Rebecca's hands stilled. No, music was my mother's gift to me, as shooting was my father's. Both have served me well in different ways. A woman of contradictions, Ezra noted with something like respect, capable of creating beauty and dealing death with equal skill. "Aren't we all contradictions, Mr. Blackriver?" Rebecca replied. "You present yourself as a businessman, speak like an educated man, yet lead a gang of killers." Ezra's smile was rueful. "My father was a schoolteacher before the war. Believed education would elevate us beyond our circumstances. He died believing that, shot by former students who'd become Confederate raiders." The personal revelation surprised Rebecca. She'd investigated the Black Rivers thoroughly, but had found little about their early lives. "After that, Mother did what she needed to survive," Ezra continued, his voice matter-of-fact rather than seeking sympathy. "Working for men like Hammond wasn't a choice so much as a necessity. When she fell ill, the responsibility of providing for Caleb fell to me." "So you became what you hated," Rebecca observed, "men who take what they want through violence." "I became practical," Ezra corrected. "The frontier rewards strength and ruthlessness, not moral superiority. The only difference between men like Crawford and myself is that he masks his violence behind respectability." Their conversation was interrupted by Morgan's return from his surveillance position at the edge of town. "Crawford's coming," he announced grimly, bringing 6 men with him. Rebecca rose from the piano, checking her weapons one final time. "More than we anticipated. He's being cautious." "Doesn't change the plan," Morgan assured her. "My deputies are in position. Holloway and the others know to stay clear until this is finished." Ezra exchanged a loaded glance with his brother. "Remember, Caleb, follow my lead. No impulsive actions." The younger Blackriver nodded reluctantly, the siblings communicating volumes in that brief eye contact. Whatever their differences, their survival had long depended on absolute trust between them. Rebecca took her position behind the bar, ostensibly as a prisoner guarded by one of Morgan's deputies, actually the town blacksmith, Wallace Peters, dressed in a borrowed badge and coat. Morgan would play the triumphant sheriff, claiming to have captured both the Black Rivers and Sullivan's daughter single-handedly. As hoofbeats approached outside, Rebecca felt a familiar calm settle over her, the tranquil clarity that preceded combat, a state her father had taught her to cultivate through countless hours of practice. "The mind must be still for the hand to be steady," he would say, guiding her through breathing exercises as she took aim at increasingly difficult targets. Benjamin. Crawford entered the saloon like a man accustomed to commanding attention. Tall and imposing at 50, with a silver-streaked beard and expensive Eastern clothing, he carried himself with the assurance of someone who had spent decades bending others to his will. His smile revealed perfect teeth as he surveyed the scene. Before him, the captive Black Rivers, Morgan standing proudly nearby and Rebecca partially visible behind the bar. "Sheriff Morgan," Crawford boomed, extending his hand. "I received your message. A remarkable achievement, capturing the entire Black River gang in a single night." Morgan shook the offered hand, playing his role perfectly. "Thank you, Mr. Crawford. Though I can't take all the credit. Miss Hawthorne here proved unexpectedly helpful." Crawford's eyes narrowed as he focused on Rebecca. "The piano player? I'm afraid I don't understand." "Perhaps you know her better by another name," Morgan suggested. "Sullivan's daughter." The change in Crawford was subtle but unmistakable. A momentary tensing of his shoulders, a hardening around his eyes that vanished almost immediately behind his practiced smile. "Sullivan," Crawford repeated, feigning confusion. "I'm not familiar with the name." "I believe you are," Rebecca spoke up, stepping forward into full view. "Just as you were familiar with Wesley Hammond and his methods for acquiring property through intimidation and murder." Crawford's smile remained fixed, though it no longer reached his eyes. "These are serious allegations, Miss Sullivan, is it? Based on what evidence?" "Documentation in your safe," Rebecca replied calmly. Correspondence with Hammond going back years, including discussions of my parents' property and how to remove obstacles to your expansion. Preposterous, Crawford scoffed, though his gaze darted briefly to his men, who had spread out around the room in defensive positions. I've never even heard of your parents. James and Eleanor Sullivan. Rebecca continued, watching Crawford's face carefully. Their farm bordered Hammond's proposed railway spur. When my father refused to sell, Hammond had them killed, their home burned with them inside. A tragic story, Crawford acknowledged with feigned sympathy. But it has nothing to do with me. Sheriff, I'm surprised you would entertain such wild accusations from a woman clearly seeking to deflect attention from her own criminal associations. Morgan maintained his role, looking appropriately conflicted. Miss Sullivan's claims are concerning, Mr. Crawford, particularly since they align with information the Black Rivers have provided about their employment. You're taking the word of notorious outlaws? Crawford's voice rose indignantly as he gestured toward Ezra and Caleb. These men are killers and thieves. They'll say anything to save themselves. Ezra spoke up, his tone conversational. That's true, of course. We would say anything. But unlike Miss Sullivan, we have proof of our relationship with you. Crawford's composure slipped further. What proof? The receipt for our initial payment, Ezra replied smoothly. $10,000 as advance for land acquisition services. Your signature, your personal letterhead. I believe the territorial governor would find it interesting reading, as would the investors you've been courting from St. Louis, Rebecca added. Men who believe they're partnering with a legitimate businessman, not someone who employs outlaws to terrorize small landowners. Crawford's facade of respectability crumbled completely. His face flushed with anger as he turned to his men. Arrest them all, the Black Rivers for their crimes, this woman and the sheriff for conspiracy and slander. His men hesitated, confused by the order to arrest the town's lawman. Morgan used their momentary uncertainty to signal through the window, a prearranged sign to his deputies positioned outside. Your men have no authority here, Crawford, Morgan stated firmly, dropping the pretense of cooperation. And the militia arriving this morning answers to the territorial governor, not to you. Crawford's hand moved toward his coat, but Rebecca was faster. Her father's Colt appeared in her hand, aimed steadily at Crawford's chest. I wouldn't, she advised quietly. Unlike the Black Rivers, I have no interest in making deals. You were Hammond's partner when my parents died. That makes you equally responsible. For a tense moment, no one moved. Crawford's men looked to him for direction, while Morgan and Rebecca maintained their positions, weapons ready. The Black Rivers remained in their staged captivity, watching the confrontation unfold with calculating eyes. What do you want? Crawford finally asked, his voice tight with suppressed rage. Money? Is that it? Justice, Rebecca replied simply, beginning with the contents of your safe, the documentation proving your connection to Hammond and his crimes. Crawford's laugh held no humor. And you expect me to simply open my safe for you, hand over papers that don't exist? No, Rebecca acknowledged. I expect you to make the rational choice when faced with limited options. Either cooperate now, preserving the possibility of leniency, or face the consequences when your role in decades of corruption is exposed. You have nothing, Crawford insisted, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. No proof, just wild accusations. Rebecca holstered her weapon, a move that surprised everyone in the room. From her pocket she withdrew a folded piece of paper, a telegraph form that Morgan had received earlier. This arrived from Jefferson City last night, she explained, handing it to Crawford, a response to Sheriff Morgan's inquiries about Hammond's business dealings. It confirms that following Hammond's death, all his assets and business interests transferred to his junior partner, you, Mr. Crawford. Crawford's face paled as he read the telegram. This proves nothing illegal. Perhaps not by itself, Rebecca agreed. But combined with the Black River's testimony about their employment, the pattern of intimidation against landowners who refused to sell, and the convenient deaths of those who opposed your plans, the territorial governor is already suspicious, which is why he dispatched the militia. Morgan stepped forward. The militia arrives in less than 2 hours, Crawford. When they do, they'll find either a cooperative witness helping expose corruption or the mastermind behind a criminal conspiracy. Your choice. Crawford's calculating mind was evident as he weighed his diminishing options. Finally, he nodded curtly. Very well. The safe is at my ranch. I'll need to return there. Not alone, Rebecca insisted. Sheriff Morgan and I will accompany you. And my men will remain here under the supervision of Deputy Peters and the Black Rivers, Morgan stated, causing Crawford to look at him sharply. You're trusting them? Crawford asked incredulously, gesturing toward Ezra and Caleb. Temporarily, Morgan confirmed. They have as much interest in seeing you held accountable as we do. As Morgan untied the Black Rivers, Crawford watched with barely contained fury. The power dynamic had shifted dramatically, leaving him isolated and outmaneuvered by the unlikely alliance arrayed against him. This isn't over, he muttered to Rebecca as they prepared to depart. Men like me don't fall so easily. Men like you rely on fear and corruption, Rebecca replied evenly. Remove those, and you're remarkably vulnerable. The ride to Crawford's ranch passed in tense silence. Dawn was breaking over the eastern hills, painting the landscape in delicate pinks and golds that belied the darkness of their purpose. Rebecca rode alongside Morgan with Crawford between them, his hands bound but his bearing still proud. As they approached the imposing gates of Crawford's estate, Rebecca felt the weight of the moment pressing upon her. Beyond those gates lay not just evidence of Crawford's crimes, but the final chapter in a story that had defined her life since her parents' murder. Whatever they found in Crawford's safe would either validate her years of seeking justice or leave questions forever unanswered. The guards at the gate straightened to attention at their employer's approach, only to register confusion at his bound. Hands and grim expression. Stand down, Crawford ordered them tersely. Sheriff Morgan and his companion are here on official business. The guards hesitated, clearly uncertain how to respond to their employer, arriving as a prisoner. Morgan's hand moved to his gun, preparing for resistance. Don't be fools, Crawford snapped at his men. Do as I say. Reluctantly, the guards stepped aside, allowing the strange procession to continue toward the main house. As they dismounted before the sprawling mansion, Rebecca caught Morgan's eye, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. They were steps away from uncovering the truth, or walking into a trap that could end everything they had fought for. Crawford's study exuded calculated opulence, mahogany bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes, a massive desk of polished oak, and oil paintings of Western landscapes that had likely never felt their owner's appreciative gaze. Behind one such painting, a dramatic rendering of a mountain valley, was embedded the safe that contained the culmination of Rebecca's years-long quest for justice. Open it, Morgan instructed, keeping his revolver trained steadily on Crawford. The businessman's hands worked the combination with practiced ease, though his expression remained one of barely contained rage. The heavy door swung open with a metallic groan, revealing neatly organized stacks of documents, cash, and several small wooden boxes. The Hammond correspondence? Crawford stated flatly, gesturing to a leather portfolio. Take it and be done. Rebecca reached for the portfolio but paused, her instincts warning her that Crawford's sudden cooperation masked something dangerous. She stepped back instead, gesturing with her weapon. You remove it, she instructed. Slowly, a flicker of frustration. crossed Crawford's face, confirmation that Rebecca's caution was warranted. As he reluctantly withdrew the portfolio from the safe, Morgan stepped forward to take it, maintaining his vigilance. "There's nothing incriminating there," Crawford insisted as Morgan handed the portfolio to Rebecca. "Business correspondence. Between associates, nothing more." Rebecca opened the leather case, quickly scanning the contents. Her eyes widened slightly as she recognized Hammond's distinctive handwriting, the same script she had memorized from documents recovered after her parents' deaths. Letter after letter detailed land acquisitions, strategies for pressuring reluctant sellers, and thinly veiled references to more drastic measures when necessary. Then she found it, dated 2 weeks before the fire that claimed her parents' lives. Crawford Sullivan remains obstinate despite increased pressure. His position threatens the entire Northern Spur project. Mrs. Blackriver provides useful intelligence regarding his movements and vulnerabilities. Expect resolution within the month. The property will be secured through the usual legal channels following the unfortunate accident being arranged. Rebecca's hand trembled slightly as she passed the letter to Morgan. "This confirms everything. Hammond ordered my parents' murder, used Elizabeth Blackriver's information, and you inherited both the crime and its profits." Crawford's facade of dignified businessman finally crumbled completely. "You understand nothing," he spat. "The frontier isn't built by idealists or weaklings. Hammond understood that progress demands sacrifice. Your father was one stubborn man, standing in the way of development that brought prosperity to thousands. You justify murder as progress?" Morgan asked, genuine disgust evident in his voice. "I justify necessary actions in service of inevitable change," Crawford countered. "The railroad needed that land. Your father's refusal threatened investments worth millions, jobs for hundreds, and development throughout the territory." Rebecca studied Crawford with cold clarity. "My father wasn't opposing progress. He was opposing theft. Hammond offered him a fraction of the land's value, knowing the railroad would multiply its worth tenfold." "He should have taken what was offered," Crawford replied dismissively. "His principles cost him his life, and for what? The land was developed anyway." The casual cruelty of his response struck Rebecca with physical force. After years of searching for those responsible for her parents' deaths, she now faced not a cackling villain, but a businessman who viewed murder as merely another transaction. Regrettable, perhaps, but ultimately justified by the balance sheet. "Gather the evidence, all of it," Morgan instructed, his tone hardening as he witnessed Rebecca's reaction. "Every letter, every document linking Crawford to Hammond and the Blackrivers." As Rebecca methodically emptied the safe of its incriminating contents, Crawford's composure deteriorated further. "You think this ends with me? Hammond had partners in the territorial capital, judges and legislators who benefited from our operations. They won't allow this to become public." "Perhaps not," Morgan acknowledged, "but they'll sacrifice you to protect themselves. Men like you are always expendable to those with true power, Crawford, just as you considered the Blackrivers expendable." Outside, the distinctive sound of multiple horses approaching drew their attention. Morgan moved to the window, peering cautiously through the heavy curtains. "The militia's arrived," he announced. "Earlier than expected." Crawford's expression shifted subtly, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth that immediately put Rebecca on alert. "Something wasn't right. You sent for them early, didn't you?" she asked Crawford, understanding dawning. "They're not here to arrest the Blackrivers. They're here responding to your call." Crawford straightened, confidence returning to his posture. "Captain Mercer is an old friend. When I informed him that notorious outlaws had taken me hostage, he arranged to expedite his company's arrival." Morgan and Rebecca exchanged alarmed glances. Their carefully constructed plan was unraveling. The militia would be operating under Crawford's version of events, perceiving them as the criminals rather than the man they held at gunpoint. "We need to leave," Morgan stated urgently. "Now, before they surround the house." Rebecca secured the portfolio of evidence, her mind racing through their limited options. The main entrance would be watched, the most obvious escape routes covered by Crawford's men, and now the approaching militia. "The servants' entrance," she suggested, "through the kitchen and out the back." Crawford's smile widened. "By all means, try to run. Captain Mercer has orders to shoot escapees. After all, Sullivan's daughter is known to be extremely dangerous." Morgan grabbed Crawford's arm, forcing him forward. "Then you're coming with us as insurance." They moved swiftly through the mansion's opulent hallways, Morgan keeping Crawford at gunpoint while Rebecca led the way, her father's Colt ready for any resistance. The house staff scattered at their approach, clearly having been warned to stay clear of whatever was about to unfold. As they reached the kitchen, the first militiamen were visible through the windows, establishing positions around the property. Rebecca spotted a small door beside the pantry, the servants' exit to the rear gardens. "That's our way out," she indicated to Morgan. "If we can reach the stables, we might have a chance." Crawford chose that moment to act, driving his elbow hard into Morgan's ribs. The sheriff grunted in pain, but maintained his grip as Crawford shouted at the top of his lungs, "Help! In here! They're trying to—" Rebecca's swift blow silenced him, the pistol butt connecting with Crawford's temple with calculated force, enough to stun but not to kill. He slumped in Morgan's arms, momentarily unconscious. "That won't keep him quiet for long," Morgan observed grimly. "Long enough," Rebecca replied, already moving toward the exit. They emerged into the kitchen garden, Crawford's dead weight slowing their progress as they half-dragged him between them. The stables lay 50 yards away across an open stretch of ground, a dangerous gauntlet to run with militia closing in from multiple directions. "We won't make it," Morgan assessed, his experienced eye taking in the tactical situation. "They'll see us before we're halfway there." Rebecca scanned their surroundings, her father's training asserting itself in the critical moment. "The smokehouse," she indicated with a nod toward a small stone building nestled against the garden wall. "We can hold there, at least until Crawford regains consciousness. Use him to negotiate." They changed course, reaching the smokehouse just as shouts from the main house indicated their escape had been discovered. Inside, the small building offered limited space but solid stone walls and a single defensible entrance. Morgan propped the still unconscious Crawford against the far wall, while Rebecca secured the heavy wooden door. "How long until the Black Rivers realize something's wrong?" Rebecca asked, checking her ammunition. "Not long," Morgan replied. "Ezra's too smart to wait patiently once he sees the militia arrive. But whether he comes to our aid or uses the distraction to escape is another question entirely." Rebecca nodded her understanding. Their alliance with the Black Rivers had always been one of convenience rather than trust. With Crawford's militia now in play, Ezra might reasonably conclude that his best option was to gather his brother and remaining men and disappear. Outside, organized movement suggested the militia was conducting a systematic search of the grounds. Captain Mercer's voice carried clearly as he issued orders to his men. "Search every outbuilding. Remember, they have Crawford as a hostage. No shooting unless you have a clear target." "At least they're not shooting on sight," Morgan observed dryly. Crawford began to stir, groaning as he regained consciousness. His eyes focused slowly, then widened as he registered his situation. "You've made a fatal error," he stated, touching his temple gingerly where a bruise was already forming. "Captain Mercer has 30 men under his command. You're trapped." "Perhaps," Rebecca acknowledged, "but we have you and these." She patted the portfolio of evidence. "Your letters to Hammond, details of your operations with the Black Rivers, records of bribes paid to territorial officials. More than enough to ensure that even if we don't leave here alive, your reputation and freedom won't survive either." Crawford's face darkened with fury. "What do you want?" "Safe passage," Morgan answered promptly. "For us and the evidence. Once we've delivered these documents to the territorial governor, what happens to you will be in the hands of justice rather than ours." A humorless laugh escaped Crawford. "Justice? In this territory? You're more naive than I thought, Sheriff." "Maybe," Morgan conceded, "but I've spent my life upholding the law, even when it seemed futile. I'm not stopping now." Rebecca moved to the smokehouse's single window, carefully peering out at the militia's search pattern. They were being methodical, which bought precious time, but eventually they would reach the smokehouse. Time was running short. "Call them off," she instructed Crawford. "Tell them you've negotiated your release in exchange for our safe passage." "And why would I do that?" Crawford challenged. "You'll be caught eventually. My position in this territory is unassailable." Rebecca knelt before him, her expression cold with determination. "Because I am James Sullivan's daughter. I tracked down every man who participated in my parents' murder. I found them across 3 territories, in towns where they thought they were safe, behind locked doors they believed secure." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than a shout. "If we don't leave here today with this evidence, I will escape eventually. And then I will dedicate every remaining day of my life to destroying everything you've built, not just killing you. That would be too simple. I will dismantle your empire piece by piece, expose every corrupt deal, turn your allies against you until you have nothing and no one left." The absolute conviction in her voice penetrated Crawford's arrogance. He saw in her eyes not just anger or revenge, but implacable purpose. The same unyielding quality that had made her father refuse to sell his land despite escalating threats. "You are your father's daughter," he acknowledged quietly, something like reluctant respect entering his voice. "Stubborn beyond reason or self-preservation." Before Rebecca could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the main house. Gunfire, shouts, and the distinctive sound of horses at full gallop. Morgan moved to the window, straining to see the source of the chaos. "It's the Black Rivers," he reported with disbelief. "They're attacking the militia, creating a diversion." Rebecca joined him at the window. Sure enough, Ezra and Caleb were leading what appeared to be not just their own men, but several of Redemption Springs' citizens in a daring raid against the surprise militia. The unexpected assault had created precisely the distraction they needed. "Honor among thieves," Rebecca remarked with genuine surprise. "I wouldn't have wagered on it." "More likely Ezra's pragmatism," Morgan suggested. "Our success ensures his potential leniency. Our failure means he hangs." Whatever the motivation, the Black River's intervention had created their opportunity. Rebecca turned back to Crawford. "Decision made. It seems your choice has been simplified, Mr. Crawford. Either cooperate now or face what's coming without." The possibility of negotiation. Crawford stared at her for a long moment, calculation evident in his eyes as he weighed his remaining options. Finally, he nodded once, the gesture of a man accustomed to recognizing when a strategic retreat was necessary. "I'll call off Mercer," he agreed. "But this isn't over, Miss Sullivan. Men like me don't stay down for long." Rebecca met his gaze unflinchingly. "That's where you're wrong, Mr. Crawford. Men like you rely on shadows and manipulation. Once exposed to the light, you wither remarkably quickly." As they prepared to emerge from their temporary refuge, the evidence secured, and their hostage cooperative for the moment, Rebecca felt a strange sense of completion. The path that had begun with her parents' murder was approaching its culmination. Not in the violent revenge she had once envisioned, but in the public justice she now knew her father would have preferred. 2 weeks had passed since the confrontation at Crawford's estate. Redemption Springs had settled into an uneasy calm, like the stillness that follows a violent storm. The $silver saloon had been repaired, bullet holes plastered over, and broken furniture replaced, though the memory of gunfire lingered in the cautious glances of patrons. Rebecca sat at the piano, her fingers moving with practiced grace across keys that had been carefully retuned after the chaos. The melody flowed with particular poignancy tonight, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece her mother had taught her long ago in what sometimes felt like another lifetime. The saloon was unusually quiet for a Friday evening. Many townsfolk had travelled to the territorial capital for Crawford's preliminary hearing, eager to witness the downfall of a man whose influence had seemed untouchable merely days before. The evidence Rebecca and Morgan had secured proved devastating, not just to Crawford, but to several territorial officials whose corruption had been meticulously documented in the seized correspondence. The soft creak of the batwing doors announced Sheriff Morgan's arrival. He nodded to Holloway behind the bar, then made his way to the piano, where Rebecca continued playing, though her eyes acknowledged his presence. "Just got word from Judge Patterson," Morgan said when she finished the piece. "Crawford's being held without bail. The governor's appointed a special prosecutor for the case." Rebecca nodded, absorbing the news with quiet satisfaction. "And the Black Rivers." Ezra's testimony proved valuable enough that the judge agreed to our terms. 5 years for him, 3 for Caleb, with consideration for early release based on continued cooperation. Morgan settled onto the bench beside her, his weathered face reflecting a complex mixture of professional satisfaction and personal weariness. 5 years seems lenient for their crimes, Rebecca observed, though without judgment. "Perhaps," Morgan acknowledged, "but their assistance was crucial. Without their diversion at Crawford's estate, we might not have secured the evidence." And Ezra's testimony implicated 3 more of Hammond's former associates in operations across 2 territories. Rebecca's fingers traced a simple melody as she considered this outcome. Justice had taken an unexpected form, not the clean vengeance she had once envisioned, but something more complex and perhaps more lasting. "You haven't played that since you were 16, came a voice from the entrance. Ezra Blackriver, flanked by 2 deputies preparing to transport him to the territorial prison in the morning. Rebecca's hands stilled on the keys. "Mozart's Sonata." "In C, my mother's favorite," Ezra nodded, approaching with the deputies following cautiously behind. "My mother mentioned hearing you play it once at a church social in Missouri. Before Hammond, before everything changed." The revelation struck Rebecca with unexpected force, this tenuous connection between their mothers in a more innocent time, before violence and necessity had reshaped both their lives. "I came to say goodbye, Miss Sullivan," Ezra continued, maintaining a respectful distance, "and to give you this." He nodded to one of the deputies, who produced a small leather journal and placed it on the piano. "What is this?" Rebecca asked, not reaching for it immediately. "My mother's diary," Ezra explained. "She documented everything, her work for Hammond, the information she provided, her regrets afterward. I think you'll find the entries about your parents particularly relevant." Rebecca's hand hovered over the journal, the past and its pain suddenly palpable in the small volume. "Why give this to me now?" "Because understanding is worth something," Ezra replied simply. "My mother made choices she came to regret deeply, just as I have, just as we all do when survival seems to demand compromise." Morgan watched the exchange with careful neutrality, though his hand remained near his holster, a lawman's instinct, even in moments of apparent reconciliation. 5 years is a long time to contemplate one's choices, Rebecca observed, finally taking the journal. Ezra's smile held no humor. I've had worse sentences. The opportunity to build something legitimate afterward is more than I expected." He glanced at Morgan. "Assuming the sheriff's word holds regarding that ranch lease." "It holds," Morgan confirmed. "The property needs managing while the territorial government sorts out Crawford's assets. If you and your brother prove trustworthy during your sentences, it could become a permanent arrangement." Ezra extended his hand to Rebecca, a gesture that surprised everyone present, including his guards. After a moment's consideration, she accepted it with a firm handshake. "Safe travels, Mr. Blackriver," she said formally. "Make good use of your second chance." As the deputies led Ezra away, Rebecca returned her attention to the piano, though her thoughts remained on the journal now resting beside the sheet music. The past never truly vanished, she reflected. It merely transformed, sometimes offering unexpected paths toward resolution. The following morning found Rebecca at the train station, her few possessions packed in a single trunk. Martha Collins fussed over her departure, having insisted on accompanying her to the platform despite the early hour. "You'll write, won't you?" the milliner asked, adjusting Rebecca's travelling coat with maternal concern. "Let us know where you settle next." "Of course," Rebecca promised, touched by the genuine affection that had developed between them, "though I haven't decided where that will be yet." Morgan arrived as the train whistle sounded in the distance, his expression suggesting he'd expected to find her here, despite her not having announced her departure plans. "Heading east?" he inquired, nodding toward her ticket. "St. Louis initially," Rebecca confirmed, "then perhaps Boston. There are conservatories that might value a piano teacher with my experience." "And Sullivan's daughter?" Morgan asked quietly, ensuring they wouldn't be overheard. Rebecca considered the question thoughtfully. She found what she was seeking. Perhaps now she can rest while Rebecca Hawthorne, or whatever name I choose next, builds something new. The approaching train's rumble grew louder as Morgan produced a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Something for your journey," he explained, offering it to her. Inside was a deputy's badge polished to a high shine. "The territorial governor was impressed by your assistance in the Crawford case," Morgan explained. "There's a position available in the marshal's office if you want it. Your skills would serve the territory well." Rebecca held the badge, its weight significant in more ways than one. "I've spent so many years pursuing justice for my family," she reflected. "I'm not sure I know how to pursue it for others." "You already have," Morgan countered. "Crawford's arrest affects dozens of families who suffered under his operations. The evidence you secured will change lives throughout the territory." The train pulled into the station with a hiss of steam and screech of brakes. Rebecca studied the badge a moment longer before returning it to its wrapping. "I need time," she said finally, "to determine if music or justice, or perhaps both, is the path forward." Morgan nodded his understanding. "The offer remains open. In the meantime, there's a piano in need of a skilled player at the governor's mansion. I took the liberty of mentioning your name." Rebecca smiled, genuinely surprised. "Lobbying for my future sheriff?" "Ensuring talents aren't wasted," he corrected, "whether with keyboard or Colt." As passengers began boarding, Rebecca gathered her handbag. "I never thought my father's lessons would lead where they did," she admitted, "or that I'd find resolution in Redemption Springs of all places." "Perhaps the name isn't coincidental," Morgan suggested with rare philosophical insight. Their farewell was brief but meaningful, the respect between them transcending words. As Rebecca settled into her compartment, she opened Elizabeth Blackriver's journal, finally ready to understand the full complexity of the events that had shaped her life. The train pulled away from Redemption Springs, carrying Rebecca toward an uncertain future. Through the window, she watched the town recede, the Silver Dollar Saloon, the church whose bell tower had provided crucial vantage, Martha Collins waving until the train rounded a bend. In her valise, carefully wrapped between layers of clothing, rested her father's Colt. She hadn't been able to leave it behind, this extension of James Sullivan's legacy. But for the first time in years, it felt like a choice rather than a necessity, a skill she possessed rather than a burden she carried. As the landscape opened before her, Rebecca's fingers tapped a gentle rhythm against the windowsill. Not Chopin or Mozart, but something new, a composition taking shape in her mind. The melody carried echoes of her past, but moved inexorably forward. Just as she now did, Sullivan's daughter would always be part of her, but no longer the whole. In a town called Redemption, Rebecca Hawthorne had found something she hadn't known she was seeking, not just justice for the dead, but possibility for the living. The train gathered speed, carrying her toward that possibility, leaving behind the piano player who had proven to be so much more than anyone in Redemption Springs could have imagined, except, perhaps, for those who had dared to taunt her and lived to regret their grave miscalculation. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.